She could smell it before anyone else could, the faint copper-sweet scent of soil turning hungry. The pack called her nose broken, scent mad, the Omega who sniffed at dirt like a starving dog and claimed the earth was forgetting how to give. But Brandy Connor had learned long ago that being right and being believed were two entirely different survivals. They laughed when she started storing meat that winter. They laughed harder when she didn't stop. They stopped laughing when the famine came. Chapter 1. The Scent of Rot. The dawn smelled wrong. Brandy pressed her fingers into the soil at the edge of the eastern field and brought them to her nose. Copper. Ash. The faint sweetness of decay that hadn't started yet, but would. She'd smelled it before, 15 years ago, when she was 12, and her mother had pressed her face to the ground and whispered, "Remember this, when the earth stops breathing, you'll smell it first." Her mother had been right about the locust plague. She'd warned the pack for 6 months, marking the changes in the soil, the strange behavior of the birds, the way the insects moved in patterns that suggested desperation rather than migration. The pack had called her hysterical. They'd called her worse than that. They'd exiled her 3 weeks before the locusts came and stripped the valley bare. Brandy had been there when her mother left, walking into the western woods with nothing but a water skin and the clothes on her back. When she'd watched her mother's white blonde hair disappear into the tree line and learned the first essential lesson of Omega survival. The pack will choose comfort over truth until comfort kills them. The second lesson came when the locusts arrived and her mother never returned. Truth doesn't save you if no one listens in time. She stood, wiping the soil from her hands onto her worn leather apron. The sun was cresting the hills now, turning the valley gold in that particular way that made everything look blessed. The pack would wake soon, stretch in their warm beds, eat their full breakfasts, and go about their day believing the world was exactly as solid as it appeared. Brandy had 6 months, maybe less. She walked back toward her cottage at the edge of the Omega Quarter, a squat stone building with a thatched roof that leaked when it rained, and a garden plot she'd spent 3 years coaxing back to productivity. And the cottage had belonged to her mother before the exile. The pack had let Brandy keep it, not out of kindness, but because no one else wanted to live that far from the center, that close to the tree line where the wild things prowled. She preferred it that way. Distance meant privacy. Privacy meant people didn't watch too closely when you started preparing for disasters they refused to see coming. Inside, she pulled out the ledger she'd been keeping since the first scent appeared 2 months ago. And birch bark pages, carefully scraped and dried, covered in her tight handwriting. Dates, observations, calculations, first scent detected, early autumn, eastern fields, river levels, dropping, 2 inches below seasonal average, fish population, decreased, bodies found downstream, no visible disease, bird migration, 3 weeks early, disorganized patterns, deer behavior, skittish, moving down from high country prematurely. She added today's notes, then turned to the calculations page. And the pack numbered 247 wolves. In a normal winter, they consumed approximately 12 deer per week, supplemented by smaller game, stored grain, and preserved vegetables. The pack's current storage system assumed normal conditions: mild winter, accessible hunting, functioning trade routes. Her mother had taught her different mathematics, famine mathematics. 6 rabbits per week would keep 1 wolf alive at minimal function, 12 if they were nursing, yet 24 if winter stretched past the thaw and the spring hunt failed. Scale that to 247 wolves, factor in the fact that half of them wouldn't ration properly, and you needed enough preserved meat to feed 400 wolves for 4 months, minimum. She looked at the number she'd written at the bottom of the page and felt the familiar weight settle in her chest. Not fear exactly, something colder and more practical. And the weight of knowing what was coming and knowing that preparing for it would make her a target long before it made her a savior. But she'd made her choice the day she'd watched her mother walk into the woods. She would not die unbelieved. By mid-morning, Brandy was in the market square, trading herb pouches for information. She'd built a small reputation as a healer over the years, nothing that challenged the pack's official physicians. It's just an Omega woman who knew which plants stopped infection and which ones eased pain. It was enough to give her access to the merchants, the farmers, the hunters who passed through with news from other territories. "River's low this year," she said to Stuart, one of the northern traders, as she handed him a pouch of dried willow bark for his wife's joint pain. Stuart grunted, counting out 3 copper coins. "Been low for months, but the wells are still good, so no one's worried." "The wells feed from the river eventually." He looked at her with the particular expression people got when she said things they didn't want to think about. "You sound like your mother, girl. That kind of talk doesn't end well." Brandy took the coins without responding. Stuart meant it as a warning, maybe even as kindness. She filed it away in the column of her mind marked people who might listen when it gets bad enough. She moved through the market, listening more than speaking. The grain merchant mentioned his supplier was raising prices. Something about a bad harvest in the eastern territories, but you know how they exaggerate. The butcher was selling more meat than usual. "Everyone wants to stock up early this year, don't know why." The fishmonger had empty stalls 3 days a week now. The fish aren't biting like they used to. Small signs. Individual data points that meant nothing alone and everything together. And she bought what she could with her meager coins, salt mostly, and the cheapest cuts of meat the butcher was willing to part with. On her way out of the square, she passed a group of younger pack members lounging near the fountain. She recognized them: Danny, the beta's nephew, and his friends. They watched her with the lazy cruelty of wolves who'd never been hungry enough to stop finding entertainment in other people's fear. "Look, it's the dirt sniffer," Danny called out. His friends laughed. Had Brandy kept walking. "Hey, Omega!" He jogged to catch up with her, his friends trailing behind. "Heard you've been buying up meat. You planning to eat all winter by yourself, or you finally giving up on trying to find a mate?" More laughter. Brandy stopped and turned to face him. Danny was tall, well-fed, with the kind of confidence that came from never having consequences. His eyes were bright with the particular meanness of someone performing for an audience. "I'm provisioning," she said evenly. "For what? The apocalypse?" He grinned at his friends. "Your mother used to talk like that. Worked out real well for her." Something cold moved through Brandy's chest. Not anger. She'd learned years ago that anger was a luxury Omegas couldn't afford. This was colder, more like arithmetic. "Yes," she said quietly. "It did." Danny's grin faltered slightly. She held his gaze for one more second, long enough to let him see that she wasn't afraid, short enough that it wouldn't read as challenge, then turned and continued walking. Behind her, she heard one of his friends mutter, "She's fucking crazy." She was. She knew it. The pack knew it. The difference was, she was crazy in the direction of survival, and they were sane in the direction of extinction. Chapter 2. The Mathematics of Starvation. 6 rabbits per week would keep 1 wolf alive, 12 if they were nursing, 24 if winter stretched past the thaw and the spring hunt failed. Brandy didn't learn these numbers from books. She learned them from the hollow spaces in her mother's eyes the year the locusts came, and the pack ate their breeding stock and pretended afterward it had been a choice. She'd been 12, old enough to understand hunger, and young enough to believe the adults when they said it wouldn't happen again. Her mother had taught her differently. In the weeks before the exile, when the pack was still pretending the failed harvest was temporary, her mother had sat her down at their small kitchen table and explained the mathematics of starvation with the same calm precision other mothers used to teach their daughters how to sew. "When the food runs out," her mother had said, "people don't get more generous. They get more vicious. The pack will ration last and hoard first. They'll tell themselves it's temporary until it's too late to matter, and when they finally panic, they'll look for someone to blame." She'd been right about all of it. Now, 15 years later, Brandy stood in the small shed behind her cottage and ran those same calculations. The deer carcass hanging from the iron hook was a gift from Jake, the older hunter who sometimes took pity on her. Not charity. Exactly. She'd treated his infected hand last month and probably saved him from losing the fingers, but close enough to charity that she'd noted it carefully in her mental ledger under debts owed. She worked quickly, her knife moving with practiced efficiency. The meat came away in long strips, each one salted and laid out on the drying racks she'd built from scavenged wood and wire. The process was time-consuming, tedious, and absolutely necessary. By midday, now she had 40 pounds of venison drying in the sun. It would reduce to about 12 pounds once preserved, enough to feed one wolf for 2 weeks at starvation rations. She needed to multiply that number by 100. The knock came just after noon when Brandy was rendering fat in a pot over her outdoor fire. She looked up to find Ida standing at her gate, holding a cloth-wrapped bundle. Ida was older, maybe 60, and with gray streaking through her brown hair and the kind of face that had settled into permanent worry lines. She'd been friends with Brandy's mother, back before the exile. After, she'd been one of the few who'd bothered to check on Brandy, though never publicly enough to risk association. "Brought you something," Ida said, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to be watched. Probably was. The pack didn't trust private conversations, especially not ones involving the dirt sniffer Omega. And Brandy wiped her hands and took the bundle. Inside were 3 rabbits, already gutted and cleaned. "Ida, I can't." "You can." Ida's voice was firm. "My grandson caught them this morning. We've got more than we need, and—" She hesitated. "Your mother once told me that if the soil ever smelled like copper and ash at the same time, I should start preserving everything I could carry." Brandy went very still. "You smell it?" "No." Ida looked down at her weathered hands. But I trust that you do." It was the first time anyone had said it out loud. The first acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, Brandy wasn't insane. "How long do we have?" Ida asked quietly. "I don't know. 6 months, maybe less." Brandy set the rabbits down carefully. "The signs are accelerating. The fish are dying. The river's dropping. The deer are coming down from the high country too early, and they're already half-starved." Ida nodded slowly, absorbing this. "What do we need?" "Salt. Preservation supplies. Meat, as much as you can get without drawing attention." Brandy paused. And silence. If the pack knows people are stockpiling, they'll either panic or they'll call it hoarding and confiscate it. Like they did before the locusts. Exactly like that. Ida was quiet for a long moment, looking at the drying racks, the rendering fat, the careful organization of Brandy's small operation. "You're preparing for all of us, aren't you?" "Well, it's not just yourself." Brandy didn't answer immediately. The truth was complicated. Yes, she was preparing for the pack, but she was also keeping a list, mental, careful, never written down, of who had laughed at her mother, who had stayed silent, who had thrown stones the day of the exile. She told herself it was just information, data, the same as tracking the river levels or the bird migrations. She told herself she hadn't decided yet what she'd do with that information when the time came. I'm preparing," she said finally. "What happens when it's needed? That depends on a lot of things." Ida studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough." She turned to leave, then paused. "Your mother would be proud of you, girl, even if she'd also tell you you're being an idiot for staying." After Ida left, Brandy returned to her work. The rabbits went onto the processing table. The fat continued rendering. And in her mind, as she added Ida's name to a different list, people who might deserve saving. The afternoon brought another visitor, though this one was less welcome. Guy was the pack's official historian, a middle-aged wolf with ink-stained fingers and a permanent squint from too many years reading by candlelight. He was also a coward, which Brandy had known since childhood when he'd watched her mother's exile from the crowd and said nothing. He stood at her gate now, not quite entering her property, and holding a leather-bound journal. "Brandy," he said, "I wonder if I might have a word." She didn't stop working. "About? Your activities." He gestured vaguely at the drying racks. "There's been talk in the pack, concerns about hoarding. I'm preserving meat I legally acquired through trade and barter. There's no law against that." No, of course not." Guy shifted his weight. "But the optics, you understand, given your mother's history." "Some people are wondering about your intentions." Brandy set down her knife and turned to face him fully. My intentions are to not starve. If that's concerning to people, they're welcome to come ask me about it directly instead of sending the historian to intimidate me. Guy flinched. I'm not here to intimidate. I'm here to warn you. The beta is asking questions. If you're seen as destabilizing, Brandy laughed, sharp and humorless. I'm drying meat, Guy. And if that destabilizes the pack has bigger problems than me. That's not what He stopped, frustrated. Look, I'm trying to help you. Keep your head down. Stop drawing attention. The beta doesn't like omegas who get ideas above their station. Ideas like survival? Guy's face tightened. For a moment, Brandy thought she saw something in his expression. Guilt, maybe, or the ghost of the man he might have been if he'd had more courage. But it passed quickly. Al replaced by the careful neutrality of someone who'd spent a lifetime choosing comfort over confrontation. Just be careful, he said quietly, and left. Brandy watched him go, then returned to her work. Her hands moved automatically now, muscle memory taking over while her mind calculated. Guy's visit meant the beta knew about her stockpiling, which meant she had less time than she'd thought before the pack decided she was a problem that needed solving. She'd have to accelerate her timeline. And that night, working by lamplight, she updated her calculations. The new numbers weren't good, even if she worked every daylight hour for the next 4 months. Even if she traded every service and called in every debt, she'd have maybe enough preserved food for 50 wolves. 60 if they rationed brutally. Not enough for the whole pack. Not even close. She stared at the numbers, feeling the weight of impossible mathematics pressing down on her chest. And her mother had died trying to save people who wouldn't listen. Brandy was preparing to watch some of those same people starve. The difference was, this time she'd know exactly who she could have saved and chose not to. She picked up her quill and started a new page. At the top, she wrote, Priority Distribution List. Then she sat for a long time, staring at the blank space below, before she finally began filling it in. Chapter 3. The Alpha's Curiosity. Alpha Jake Hull didn't visit the Omega Quarter, so when his shadow fell across Brandy's drying racks on the first morning of autumn, when the wind had begun carrying the wrong kind of cold, the kind that came from absence rather than weather, she didn't stop working. Alphas don't come to learn. They come to assess threats. She'd seen him before, of course. Everyone had. Jake Hull was impossible to miss. Tall, broad-shouldered, but with dark hair he kept tied back and a presence that made rooms feel smaller. He'd been Alpha for 7 years, taking the position when his father died during a border dispute with the Eastern Territories. He ran the pack with efficient authority, the kind that didn't need to raise its voice because everyone already knew to listen. He also ran it with an expansion philosophy that had tripled their territory and doubled their population in less than a decade. Growth as defense. Strength through acquisition. Never be weak enough to be preyed upon. It was, Brandy had to admit, a reasonable survival strategy. It just wasn't hers. Brandy Connor, Jake said. Not a question. A statement of fact, delivered in a voice that carried authority the way other people carried weight. She set down the strip of venison she'd been salting and turned to face him. Up close, he was even larger than she'd realized, as though he held himself with a control that suggested he was very aware of his size and very practiced at not using it to intimidate. His eyes were gray, the color of winter sky, and they were currently studying her drying operation with an expression she couldn't quite read. Alpha, she acknowledged, neutral tone. Not deferential, but not challenging either. The careful middle ground Omegas learned to navigate. I've been receiving reports, he said, about unusual activity in the Omega Quarter, stockpiling, large-scale preservation efforts. He gestured at the racks stretching behind her, now numbering close to 100 feet. This goes beyond personal preparation. Does it? His eyes narrowed slightly. You've acquired enough preserved meat to feed 30 wolves through winter. For an Omega living alone, that's either evidence of severe paranoia or something else entirely. Or I'm good at my job and bad at trusting other people to be prepared. Your job is herb healing, last I checked. My job, Brandy said evenly, is survival. The herbs are just how I pay for it. Jake was quiet for a moment, studying her. She held his gaze, which was dangerous. Omegas didn't hold eye contact with alphas, and it read as challenge. But she'd learned from her mother that backing down first taught people you could be pushed, and she was done being pushed. "I want to see your calculations," he said finally. That surprised her. Why? Because if you're hoarding for rebellion, I need to know. And if you're preparing for something else. He paused. I need to know that too. Brandy considered him. She could refuse. It was her property, her work, her right. But refusal would confirm whatever suspicions had brought him here. And an alpha with confirmed suspicions was more dangerous than an alpha with questions. "Follow me," she said. Inside her cottage, she pulled out the birch bark ledgers and spread them across her small table. Jake had to duck slightly to enter. The cottage had been built for smaller frames, and his presence filled the space in a way that made her hyper-aware of how close they were standing. She pushed the awareness aside and focused on the numbers. "This is the pack population," she said, pointing to the first column. 247 wolves, including children. This is average consumption during normal winter months. This is average consumption during harsh winters. And this, she flipped to another page, is consumption during famine conditions, based on historical data from the locust plague 15 years ago. Jake leaned over the table, reading. His expression shifted from skeptical to focused, the look of someone actually processing information rather than waiting for their turn to speak. "You've accounted for nursing mothers," he observed, "and elderly wolves with reduced mobility, and children in growth phases who need more calories. The standard rationing models don't factor in biological variation. They assume everyone can survive on the same reduced intake. They're wrong." He looked up at her. How do you know this?" "My mother kept records during the locust plague. She documented everything. Who ate what, who weakened first, who died, and in what order. She gave me the journals before she was exiled." Something changed in Jake's face. Not quite sympathy, but recognition. "I remember your mother. I was young, but I remember. She tried to warn us about the locusts. She did warn you. The pack chose not to listen." "Yes." He said it simply, without defensiveness, and just acknowledgement of fact. It was so unexpected that Brandy paused, reassessing him. "Why are you really here?" she asked. Jake straightened, his hand still resting on the edge of her table. "Because 3 weeks ago, my scouts reported that the Eastern Territories are experiencing crop failures. 2 weeks ago, the southern trade route started detouring around the lowland passes. No official reason given, but the merchants are nervous. 1 week ago, and I received word that 2 neighboring packs have begun restricting their hunting territories." He paused. "And yesterday, my own hunters came back with half their usual yield and said the deer were already thin." Brandy's chest tightened. "You see it." "I see data points. I don't know yet what they mean." He looked at her directly. "But when I heard that the Omega daughter of the woman who predicted the last famine was stockpiling enough food to survive an apocalypse, I decided I should probably pay attention." It was the most honest thing anyone in power had ever said to her. Brandy found herself recalibrating everything she'd assumed about him. "The soil smells wrong," she said quietly. "Copper and ash. The river's dropping. The fish are dying. The birds migrated 3 weeks early. Every indicator my mother taught me to watch for is showing the same pattern as before the locusts." She met his eyes. "We have maybe 6 months before the famine hits. Maybe less." Jacob was very still. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without waiting to see if I'm right. And if I wait that long, it's too late to matter." He turned back to the ledgers, flipping through pages, his jaw tight. She watched him work through the implications, saw the moment the full weight of it settled on him. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, harder. "My father died believing that strength came from expansion, that if we were big enough, strong enough, we'd never be vulnerable." He looked up. "He was wrong. You can't expand your way out of the land itself failing." "No," Brandy agreed. "You can't. My chief advisor will tell me this is paranoid speculation, that the data is insufficient, that we can't alarm the pack over possibilities." "Your chief advisor," Brandy said carefully, has probably never been hungry enough to understand what hunger does to judgment. People who've always had enough think scarcity is theoretical. It's not. Jake studied her for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked her. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, putting them at eye level. "If you're right," he said slowly, "we have less time than I've been assuming. The pack's current stores will last maybe 6 weeks into winter. We've always relied on hunting to supplement. And if the hunting fails, 247 wolves will be competing for resources that can't support even half that number. And you've prepared for this. I've prepared for myself, and whoever I decide deserves help." She said it bluntly, because he was being honest with her, and she owed him the same. "I can't save everyone, Alpha. The mathematics don't work." His eyes darkened. "So you're planning to watch people starve? I'm planning to survive." There's a difference." "Is there?" Brandy leaned forward. "You want to know what I learned from watching my mother die for trying to save people who called her crazy? I learned that martyrdom doesn't work if no one believes you're martyring yourself for them. They just think you're insane all the way to the grave." Her voice hardened. "I won't die for people who wouldn't listen. But I also won't watch children starve if I can prevent it. So yes, I'm making choices. Ugly ones. The kind your father probably never had to make because he had institutional power, and I have birch bark and determination." The silence stretched between them, heavy with tension that wasn't quite hostility, but wasn't quite alliance either. Finally, Jake spoke. "What do you need?" Brandy blinked. "What?" "If you're right, and I'm not saying you are, but I'm not saying you're wrong either, then you're the only person in this pack who's actually prepared for what's coming. So I'm asking, what do you need to expand your operation?" She stared at him, trying to find the trick, the manipulation, the hidden cost. But his face showed only grim calculation. "Salt," she said slowly. "More preservation supplies. Access to the pack's hunting yields before they go to general distribution. And," she hesitated, "and permission to keep preparing without being accused of hoarding or rebellion." Jake's mouth tightened. "The beta won't like it. He already thinks you're problematic." "The beta can—" Brandy stopped herself. Insulting the second-in-command to the Alpha's face was probably unwise, even if they were having an honest conversation. "Can what?" There was something that might have been amusement in Jake's eyes. "Can make his peace with it," Brandy finished diplomatically. This time Jake did smile, small and brief. "I'll handle the beta. You focus on the work." He stood, and the cottage suddenly felt even smaller. But I need to be clear about something." Brandy stood as well, her head barely reaching his shoulder. "What?" "If you're doing this, if I'm supporting this, it's not just for you to pick and choose who lives. We save as many as we can, all of them, if possible." "That's not realistic." "I didn't say it was realistic. I said that's the goal." His voice carried the weight of command now, the Alpha emerging through the careful neutrality. "You do the mathematics. I'll handle the politics. Hey, but we do this together, or we don't do it at all." Brandy wanted to argue, wanted to explain that noble intentions didn't change brutal realities. But she looked at his face and saw something she recognized. The expression of someone who'd accepted a terrible responsibility and was going to carry it regardless of cost. She'd seen it in her mother's face, right before the exile. "All right," she said, "together. But when the hard choices come, and they will come, you don't get to pretend you didn't know what you were signing up for." "Agreed." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. The pack has been calling you crazy for months. After today, they're going to say you've manipulated the Alpha, that you're dangerous. They already think I'm dangerous. They think you're eccentric. There's a difference." His eyes were serious now. "This will make you a target. Are you prepared for that?" Brandy thought about her mother walking into the woods, thought about 15 years of being the dirt sniffer, the broken Omega, the woman who couldn't let go of ghosts. Thought about the list she'd started last night, the one that divided the pack into those who might deserve saving and those who definitely didn't. "I've been a target my whole life," she said. At least now I'll be a target who might actually survive. Jake nodded slowly. Oh, and then he did something completely unexpected. He extended his hand. She stared at it for a moment. Alphas didn't shake hands with Omegas. It implied equality. Before reaching out and taking it, his grip was firm, warm, and brief. "Don't make me regret this," he said. "Don't make me regret trusting you," she countered. He left without another word, ducking through her doorway and striding back across the Omega Quarter with the confident gait of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be questioned about it. Brandy stood in her doorway and watched him go, her hand still tingling slightly from the contact. Then she went back inside and updated her ledgers. Under the new column marked Resources, she added, Alpha Support, Conditional. Under Threats, she added, Beta Resistance, Inevitable. And under Timeline, she changed her estimate from 6 months to 4. Because if Jake was right about the Eastern Territories, the crop failures, the trade route disruptions, then the collapse wasn't coming in spring. It was already here. Chapter 4. The First Signs. The deer came down from the high country too early. Not in their usual migration. Confused, scattered, their ribs showing through their hides like accusations. The pack celebrated. Easy hunting, they said. A blessing, they said. Brandy counted the ways a blessing could be a scream you weren't listening to. She stood at the edge of the processing area, watching the hunters bring in their kills. 12 deer in one morning, which should have been cause for relief. And except every single one was underweight, their coats dull, their eyes carrying that particular glassiness that came from prolonged hunger. "Big haul today," Danny called out, grinning as he dragged a doe toward the skinning stations. His friends crowded around, laughing and congratulating each other. None of them seemed to notice or care that the doe probably weighed 40 pounds less than it should have. Raymond, the head hunter, noticed. Brandy watched his face as he examined the kills, and saw the concern flicker across his weathered features before he smoothed it away. He caught her eye across the yard and gave a small, grim nod. He saw it too. "The herds are moving early this year," Raymond announced to the gathered hunters, his tone carefully neutral. "We'll need to adjust our rotation schedules." "Why?" Danny asked. "If they're coming down to us, makes our job easier." "Because deer don't leave good grazing without a reason," Raymond said. And we need to know what that reason is." Danny shrugged, already losing interest. "More meat for us either way." Brandy turned away before she said something that would get her in trouble. The mathematics were simple. If the deer were already starving, the high country was already dead, which meant the famine wasn't coming in 6 months. It was already here. The land just hadn't told them yet. That afternoon, Jake sent word requesting her presence at his residence. It's not a summons. The message was polite, almost careful, but not quite a request either. The middle ground of authority, trying to figure out how to work with someone it wasn't accustomed to working with. She arrived at sunset, when the western light turned everything gold and the pack was settling in for evening meals. Jake's residence sat at the center of the territory, a large stone building that had served as the Alpha's dwelling for 3 generations. Practical rather than grand, and defensible rather than decorative. The beta, Dick Reed, was waiting outside. He was shorter than Jake, but built like a barrel, all compact muscle and barely contained aggression. His face carried the particular hardness of someone who'd fought his way to his position and didn't trust anyone who hadn't done the same. He looked at Brandy the way you'd look at something tracked in on your boot. "The Alpha's expecting you," he said flatly. "Oh, doesn't mean I think this is a good idea." "I didn't realize I needed your approval." His eyes narrowed. "You're an Omega. You don't need approval. You need to remember your place." "My place," Brandy said carefully, "is wherever the Alpha says it is, unless you're questioning his judgment." Dick's face darkened. For a moment she thought he might actually do something stupid, challenge her physically, assert dominance the way threatened males did when they felt their authority slipping. But he was smarter than that. Barely. "Just remember," he said quietly, "Alphas can change their minds, and when they do, you'll have no one to protect you." He walked away before she could respond. Brandy stood for a moment, letting her heart rate settle back to normal. She'd made an enemy today. probably had made that enemy weeks ago, but now it was official. She added it to the growing list of problems she'd deal with later. Inside, Jake was waiting in what appeared to be a planning room. His maps covered one wall, marked with territory boundaries and resource locations. A large table dominated the center, currently buried under reports and ledgers. "The deer are starving," he said without preamble. Raymond confirmed it. "The entire high country herd is compromised." "I know. I saw them." "Which means your timeline was optimistic." It wasn't a question. "Yes." Brandy moved to the table, looking at the maps. "If the high country is already failing, we have maybe 4 months. Possibly less." Jake's jaw tightened. "The Pack Council meets in 3 days. I need to present them with a plan that doesn't sound like paranoid speculation." "You could show them my calculations." "Your calculations are based on your mother's methodology. The council will dismiss them the same way they dismissed her." He looked at her directly. "I need harder evidence, something they can't ignore." "The starving deer aren't enough?" "They'll say it's a bad season, a temporary fluctuation. They'll want to believe it's nothing, because believing otherwise means admitting we're in trouble." His voice carried frustration, the kind that came from knowing people would choose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. "I need something that forces them to act." Brandy thought for a moment. "The river. If it continues dropping at the current rate, the main well will start pulling sediment within 2 weeks. That's not theoretical. That's immediate infrastructure failure." Jake nodded slowly. "That might work. It's concrete, measurable, and it affects everyone." He made a note on one of his ledgers. "I'll have the engineers monitor the levels daily." They worked for the next hour, going through her calculations, cross-referencing them with his resource maps. It was strange, working with someone who actually listened, who asked questions because he wanted answers, rather than because he was looking for holes to exploit. As Brandy found herself explaining things she'd never put into words before. The patterns her mother had taught her, the way small signs accumulated into larger certainties. "Your mother must have been remarkable," Jake said at one point. "She was right," Brandy said. "That should have been enough." "Should have been." He was quiet for a moment. "My father was wrong about a lot of things. But one thing he got right was teaching me to listen to people who'd survived things he hadn't." He looked at her. "You've survived being right when no one believed you. That's rarer than you might think." There was something in his voice, not quite vulnerability, but an honesty that felt deliberate, like he was choosing to show her something he didn't show most people. Before she could respond, the door opened. A young woman entered, maybe 17, with Jake's dark coloring and a familiar confidence in her bearing. "Uncle Jake, Mom wants to know if you're—" She stopped, seeing Brandy. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you had someone here." "Brandy, this is my niece, Paige, my sister's daughter." Jake's voice carried warmth when he spoke about her. "Paige, this is Brandy Connor. She's helping with some resource planning." Paige studied Brandy with open curiosity. "You're the Omega everyone's talking about. The one storing all the meat." "That's me." "Cool." Paige grinned. "Danny says you're crazy, but Danny's an idiot, so that's probably a good sign." "Paige," Jake said warningly, but there was amusement under it. "What?" "He is." She turned back to Brandy. "Are you really preparing for a famine?" Brandy glanced at Jake, who gave a small nod. "Permission to speak honestly." "Yes," Brandy said simply. Paige's grin faded into something more serious. And you think it's coming soon?" "I know it is. Then I want to help." She looked at Jake. "If it's real, if we're really in trouble, I should be learning how to prepare, shouldn't I?" Jake studied his niece for a long moment. Brandy could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the desire to protect her warring with the knowledge that protection sometimes meant preparation rather than ignorance. "All right," he said finally, "but you follow Brandy's instructions exactly. And you don't discuss this with anyone outside this room until I give permission." Paige nodded seriously. "I won't." After she left, Jake turned to Brandy. "She's going to need those skills. They all will." "You really think you can convince the council?" "I have to." His voice carried the weight of responsibility, the burden of being the person everyone looked to for certainty. Because if I can't, we're going to lose people we could have saved. 3 days later, and Brandy was working in her garden when the screaming started. She ran toward the sound, her heart pounding. A small crowd had gathered near the eastern well, the smaller one, not the main water source, but one of the supplementary systems the pack relied on during dry seasons. A child stood at the edge, crying. Betty, one of the mothers, was holding her back from the well opening. "What happened?" Brandy pushed through the crowd. "The water," Betty said, her voice shaking. "Show her." "Ah, Jenny." The child, Jenny, maybe 6 years old, held out her cup. The water inside was thick, brown, clouded with sediment. "It came out like that," Betty said. "It's never come out like that before." Brandy took the cup and sniffed it. Mud. The well was pulling from below the water table now, sucking up sediment because there wasn't enough clean water to sustain the draw. The river was failing faster than she'd calculated. "Is it safe to drink?" someone asked. "No," Brandy said. Not without boiling and filtering. And even then, the crowd erupted into worried murmurs. Someone ran to get the engineers. Someone else went to inform Jake. Brandy stood at the edge of the well, staring down into the murky water, and felt the cold certainty settle over her like a physical weight. 4 months had been optimistic. They had maybe 2. That night, she was woken by sounds outside her cottage. Footsteps, multiple sets, the deliberate quiet of people trying not to be heard. And she rose silently, grabbed the iron poker from beside her fireplace, and moved to the window. 3 figures stood near her drying racks. She recognized them even in the darkness, Danny and 2 of his friends. They were cutting down strips of her preserved meat, stuffing them into sacks. Rage flooded through her, hot, immediate, the kind that made her want to run outside and drive them off with her poker. But she forced herself to breathe, to think. If she confronted them, it would escalate. Danny would claim he was just taking what everyone needed, that she was hoarding while others suffered. Never mind that the suffering hadn't started yet. Never mind that her preparations were the only thing standing between the pack and mass starvation. The optics would destroy her. So she watched. She counted. She memorized exactly which ones they took and how much. And when they finally left, creeping away with their stolen goods like the thieves they were, and she went back to her ledger and made careful notes. Danny, stolen approximately 15 pounds preserved venison. Mark this date. Mark this choice. Then she added a new column to her calculations. At the top she wrote, theft compensation, resource reduction. Below it she began calculating. If they stole 15 pounds now, they'd need 15 pounds less later, which meant when the rationing started, Danny's allocation would be reduced accordingly. Not as punishment, as mathematics. She'd prepared exactly enough for the wolves she'd planned to feed. Every pound stolen now was a pound someone else wouldn't have later. Danny had just chosen which wolves those would be. He'd chosen himself. Brandy closed the ledger and returned to bed. Outside, the autumn wind carried the scent of copper and ash, stronger now than it had been even a week ago. The land was dying, and the pack was still pretending not to notice. Chapter 5. Blood in the Circle. Jake Hull had killed 12 wolves in his lifetime, all of them enemies, all of them threats to the pack. He had never had to decide whether saving one wolf meant condemning the rest. Until Brandy Connor stood in the center of the pack circle, surrounded by wolves who wanted someone to blame, and looked at him with eyes that said, "You know I'm right. You've always known." The emergency council meeting had been called at dawn, and 2 days after the Eastern Well failure. By mid-morning, it had devolved into something uglier, not a council meeting, a trial. "She's been hoarding resources while the pack suffers," Dick said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. He stood at the center of the circle, playing to the audience like the politician he was, stockpiling food, monopolizing preservation supplies, creating artificial scarcity to make herself indispensable. "The scarcity isn't artificial," Brandy said quietly. She stood alone on the opposite side of the circle, no one willing to stand close enough to be associated with her. The land is failing. The evidence is everywhere if you'd look." "Evidence?" Dick laughed. "You mean the paranoid ravings of an Omega who learned her crazy from her crazy mother? The same mother who predicted disaster and then ran away when she was proven wrong?" "She didn't run away. She was exiled. Because she was spreading panic and destabilizing the pack, just like you're doing now." Dick turned to address the crowd directly. "Look at the facts. One Omega woman, with no official position, no authority, has accumulated enough resources to feed herself for years while the rest of us are being told to ration. And now, conveniently, our wells start failing, and she's the only one who claims to have predicted it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Brandy could see the logic taking hold, and the comfortable narrative that made her the villain rather than forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths. "I didn't cause the well to fail," she said. "No? Then explain how you knew to prepare months in advance. Explain how you convinced the Alpha—" Dick shot a pointed look at Jake. "To support your operation right before our infrastructure started collapsing. Some might call that suspicious timing." "Some might call it preparation," Brandy shot back. "Which is what I've been trying to get you to do for months while you laughed at me." "We laughed at you because you're delusional." Danny stood up from the crowd. "My friends and I see you out there every day, muttering to yourself, sniffing the dirt like someone who knows how to read the warning signs you're too comfortable to see." Brandy interrupted. "The deer are starving. The fish are dead. The river is dropping 6 inches a week. These aren't opinions. They're measurements." "Measurements you could be falsifying," Dick said smoothly. "How do we know any of your data is real? You've been operating alone, in secret, with no oversight." "Because I asked her to," Jake said. The crowd went silent. He'd been standing at the edge of the circle, watching, letting Dick make his case. But now he stepped forward, and the energy shifted immediately. When an Alpha spoke, you listened. "I reviewed Brandy's calculations 3 weeks ago," Jake continued. I assigned my own scouts to verify her observations. Everything she's claimed about the environmental degradation has been confirmed by independent sources." He looked directly at Dick. "So before you accuse her of fabricating data, you might want to check with the engineering team, or the hunting captains, or anyone who's actually paying attention to what's happening beyond our walls." Dick's face tightened. "With respect, Alpha, that doesn't address the hoarding issue. As regardless of her predictions, she's monopolized resources that should have been distributed to the pack. She used her own labor and her own trade goods to acquire those resources legally," Jake said. "There's no law against preparation. There's precedent against Omega wolves accumulating excessive power," Dick countered. "The hierarchy exists for a reason. When lower-ranked wolves start operating independently, making decisions that affect pack survival without council oversight, it creates instability." "What creates instability," Jake said coldly, "is ignoring evidence because it's inconvenient. Brandy saw what was coming and prepared for it. That's not a crime. That's basic survival instinct. If anything, she's demonstrated better leadership than most of this council." The crowd erupted, wolves shouting, arguing, some supporting Jake, others backing Dick. The careful order of the pack meeting dissolved into chaos. Through it all, Brandy stood silent, and she'd learned long ago that defending yourself in these situations only made things worse. The decision had already been made before the trial ever started. Either Jake would protect her, or he wouldn't. Either the pack would listen to reason, or they wouldn't. She'd done everything she could. Now she just had to survive the consequences. "Enough!" Jake's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The crowd quieted immediately. "This council is out of order." "Well, we'll reconvene." "No," Dick stepped forward. "The pack has a right to resolution. She's been accused of hoarding and manipulation. That requires a formal judgment, which I'll deliver after proper investigation. Or we can settle it now." Dick's eyes gleamed with something cold and calculated. Traditional pack law allows for trial by challenge. If the Omega believes she's acted in the pack's interest, let her defend that claim. If she can't, he shrugged, then perhaps her resources should be redistributed to wolves who'll use them responsibly. Brandy's stomach dropped. Trial by challenge meant physical combat. An Omega versus a ranked wolf. It wasn't justice. It was execution with extra steps. "She's an Omega," Jake said flatly. "Traditional challenge law doesn't apply." "It applies if she's been operating outside Omega restrictions," Dick countered. "She's accumulated power, made strategic decisions, influenced the Alpha." "Oh, those aren't Omega behaviors. So either she's an Omega who overstepped her bounds, or she's a ranked wolf who should be held to ranked standards," he smiled. "She doesn't get to claim Omega protection while acting like a beta." It was a trap, beautifully constructed, perfectly executed. Either Brandy accepted Omega status and surrendered her resources, or she accepted ranked status and got destroyed in a challenge she couldn't win. Jake's face had gone hard. That's not how—" "I accept," Brandy said. Everyone turned to stare at her. "I accept ranked status," she continued, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "And I accept trial by challenge, under one condition." Dick's smile widened. "Omegas don't set conditions." "Ranked wolves do," Brandy said, "and you just argued I should be treated as ranked. So either I'm an Omega and this whole proceeding is invalid, or I'm ranked and I negotiate my own terms." Jake was looking at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had, but she'd learned from her mother that sometimes the only way to survive was to call a bluff so aggressively that your opponent forgot they'd been bluffing. "What condition?" Dick asked carefully. "When I win," Brandy said, "I want a formal pack position, provisioner, with authority over food logistics and resource distribution." "When you win?" Dick laughed. You think an Omega—" "Ranked wolf," Brandy corrected. "Your words, not mine. Do we have terms or not?" Dick looked at Jake, trying to read whether the Alpha would intervene. But Jake's face had gone carefully neutral, the expression of someone who'd decided to let a situation play out. "Fine," Dick said. "You win, you get your position. I win, your stockpiles are redistributed and you're exiled for creating pack instability." He gestured to the crowd. Who challenges?" Danny stepped forward immediately. "I will." Of course he would. The thief who'd stolen from her racks, now playing hero for the crowd. Brandy wanted to point out the irony but kept her mouth shut. The mathematics were simple. Danny was young, strong, trained. She was none of those things. She was going to lose. But she'd learned long ago that losing the right way could sometimes accomplish more than winning. "Tomorrow at dawn," Dick announced, "the Eastern Field. Traditional challenge rules. First blood or submission." The crowd began to disperse, already gossiping, placing bets. Brandy stood alone in the emptying circle until she felt a presence beside her. Jake. "That was stupid," he said quietly. "It was necessary. He's going to tear you apart." "Probably." She looked up at him. "But now the whole pack will be watching. And when the famine hits in the next 2 months, they'll remember that you supported me, that the beta opposed me, and that I was willing to fight for the right to save them." She paused. "Sometimes losing strategically is more valuable than winning." Jake studied her for a long moment. "Your mother taught you that too?" "No, I learned that one on my own." That evening, Ida appeared at Brandy's cottage with food and medical supplies. "For after," she said simply, setting them on the table. "I'm not going to win, Ida." "I know, but you'll survive." And surviving is its own kind of winning." The older woman's face was grim. "The pack is making a mistake. They'll realize it too late, like they always do." After Ida left, Brandy sat alone in her cottage and tried not to think about the morning. Instead, she worked on her ledgers, updating calculations, adjusting distribution schedules for the resources she'd probably lose access to after the challenge. A knock came near midnight. She opened the door to find Jake standing there, alone, without the usual trappings of his position. Just a man in plain clothes, looking tired and angry and something else she couldn't quite name. "I could stop this," he said. "I could overrule Dick, cancel the challenge, protect you by alpha authority. And lose the respect of every ranked wolf in the pack who thinks you're already giving me too much influence," Brandy said. "Dick's been waiting for you to overreach. I don't give him the excuse. So I just let you get hurt? You let me make my own choices." She stepped back from the doorway. "You want to help? Come inside." He followed her in. In the small space of her cottage, he seemed even larger, more present. She could smell him, pine and smoke, and something uniquely him that made her hyper-aware of how close they were standing. "I don't have anything to offer you," she said. "No comfort, no strategy that changes the outcome." "How Danny will win tomorrow?" "Then why did you accept the challenge?" "Because if I'd refused, I'd have been labeled a coward and lost everything anyway. At least this way, I control the narrative." She moved to her table, poured 2 cups of the pine needle tea she'd been steeping. "And because I needed the pack to see that I'm willing to fight for them, even when they don't deserve it." Jake took the offered cup, their fingers brushing. The contact sent a jolt through her that she tried to ignore. "Oh, you're braver than anyone I've met," he said quietly. "I'm practical. There's a difference." "No." He set the cup down, his eyes intense on hers. Practical would have been leaving, preparing for yourself, and letting the pack face the consequences. You stayed. You're fighting for people who've done nothing but mock you. That's not practical. That's... He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "Stupid?" Brandy suggested. "I was going to say honorable." The air between them felt charged, and dangerous. Brandy made herself step back, put distance between them before she did something irreversible. "You should go," she said. "You can't be here the night before the challenge. The optics..." "I don't care about the optics." "Well, I do. Because tomorrow when I lose, you're going to be the only thing standing between this pack and starvation. And you can't do that if Dick undermines your authority by claiming I've manipulated you." Jake's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to argue, to push back against the careful logic she was using to protect them both. But he was too intelligent not to see the truth in it. "After the challenge," he said. "When this is over, after the challenge, I'll probably be exiled," Brandy said. "Just like my mother." "No." The word came out sharp, absolute. "I won't let that happen. You might not have a choice." He moved closer, not quite touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "There's always a choice. And when I'm choosing you, however this ends." Before she could respond, before she could process what that meant, he left. Brandy stood alone in her cottage, her heart pounding, her skin still tingling from proximity she hadn't allowed herself to fully acknowledge until now. She'd prepared for famine, for theft, for persecution. She hadn't prepared for this. Outside, the autumn wind howled, carrying the scent of coming winter and dying land. Tomorrow she'd face Danny in a fight she couldn't win. Now tomorrow the pack would watch her bleed. But tonight, for just a moment, she let herself feel something other than grim determination. She let herself feel hope. It was terrifying. If you felt Brandy's ribs crack when Danny drew first blood, hit subscribe if you're to. Don't be like the pack that watched her bleed and did nothing. Be different. Chapter 6. The famine arrives. Hunger came quietly at first. A tightening around the belt. A second glance at the empty plate. The way you stop noticing the hollow curve of a child's cheek because all the cheeks were hollow now. Brandy had been hungry before, but she had never been surrounded by wolves, realizing they were going to die, and she was the only one who'd known. The challenge had happened 3 weeks ago. As she bore the scars still, a jagged cut across her ribs where Danny's claws had caught her, bruises that had faded from purple to yellow-green, and a limp that was finally starting to ease. She'd lost, as expected. First blood had been called when Danny opened her side, but she'd lasted longer than anyone anticipated. Long enough to land 3 solid hits of her own, long enough to make him work for it, long enough that the crowd's jeering had shifted to something like grudging respect. Dick had declared her resources forfeit. Jake had immediately appointed her as provisioner anyway, citing emergency powers and the fact that no one else knew how to manage the stockpiles she'd created. The political maneuvering had been elegant, ruthless, and barely within the bounds of pack law. Dick was still furious. Danny was nursing cracked ribs, and Brandy had her position. None of it mattered now, because the famine had arrived faster than even her worst calculations predicted. And the main well had failed completely 4 days ago. The secondary wells were pulling pure sediment. The hunting parties were coming back empty-handed more often than not. The deer had either fled the territory entirely or died in the high country. The fish were gone. The trade caravans had stopped coming 2 weeks ago, and the merchants claiming the routes were temporarily disrupted. The pack's central stores, the ones they'd relied on for generations, had lasted exactly 9 days once the rationing started. Now they were eating Brandy's stockpiles, the ones Dick had called hoarding, the ones Danny had stolen from, the ones that were currently the only thing keeping 247 wolves from outright starvation. They weren't enough. While Brandy stood in the main storage facility, a converted barn near the pack center, and stared at her updated calculations. The numbers didn't lie. They never did. At current consumption rates, accounting for reduced rations and prioritizing children and nursing mothers, they had enough food for 60 days. Maybe 70 if people followed the rationing schedule exactly and didn't cheat. After that, wolves would start dying. How bad is it? She turned to find Jake in the doorway, and he looked thinner than he had 3 weeks ago. Everyone did, but on him, it showed in his face more than his frame. The sharpening of cheekbones, the shadows under his eyes that came from too many nights managing crisis and too few eating properly. Bad, she said. I need to adjust the distribution schedule again. We just reduced rations 2 days ago. I know. We need to reduce them again. She handed him the ledger. The hunting continues to fail. No, we're not getting the supplemental protein I'd factored in, which means we're burning through the preserve stores faster than projected. Jake read the numbers, his face hardening. These rations won't sustain the warriors. We'll be too weak to defend the territory if anyone attacks. These rations will keep everyone alive. Barely. Brandy met his eyes. If we give the warriors more, we'll have to take it from somewhere else. The children, the elderly. Pick your moral compromise. That's not a choice. It's the only choice we have. She took the ledger back. Unless you want me to lie about the mathematics. Make it look like we have more than we do. Buy you a few more weeks of comfortable denial before everyone starves at once. Jake's jaw clenched. You know I don't want that. Then you need to accept that we're triaging. Some wolves are going to be hungrier than others. Some are going to be in danger. And you're going to have to make decisions about who suffers most. She paused. That's what leadership is when the comfortable options run out. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the shelves of preserved food that represented months of her work, weeks of the pack's survival, and the growing certainty that it wouldn't be enough. Your mother went through this, he said finally. Yes. How did she choose? Brandy thought back to those months after the locusts, the careful rationing, and the way her mother had lost weight faster than anyone else because she'd been giving her own portions away. The way she'd sat up at night, calculating who could survive on less, who needed more, making impossible choices with calm precision. She prioritized children first, nursing mothers second, then anyone with skills the pack needed to survive, healers, hunters, engineers. Everyone else got equal shares of what was left. Brandy's voice was steady, clinical. She saved 80% of the pack, but she made enemies of almost everyone she saved because they hated being reminded that they'd needed saving. Is that what you're doing? Prioritizing by value? I'm prioritizing by vulnerability and necessity, Brandy corrected. A 6-year-old child needs more calories per body weight than an adult. That's biology, not judgment. A nursing mother needs more nutrition or her milk dries up and her infant dies. That's mathematics. She looked at him directly. But yes, when it comes to the adults, I'm making choices about who gets more, and some of those choices are based on who I think deserves it. Brandy, Danny gets minimum rations, she said flatly. He stole from my stores. That means he already took his extra allocation. He doesn't get more while others go without. Jake's expression shifted to something complicated, not quite approval, not quite censure. That's revenge. That's accounting. He took 15 pounds 3 weeks ago. I'm reducing his current allocation by 15 pounds. It's fair. It's going to look like you're punishing him. I don't care what it looks like. I care about the mathematics. She gestured to the shelves. Every pound he stole is a pound someone else needed. Every wolf who laughed while I prepared is a wolf who made this harder. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't factor into my calculations. And me? Jake asked quietly. Oh, how do I factor in? Brandy looked at him. This man who'd supported her when it cost him political capital, who'd appointed her despite pack resistance, who stood in the storage facility looking gaunt and exhausted and still trying to save everyone. You get standard rations, she said, same as the other ranked wolves who didn't actively work against preparation. More than Danny, less than the children. And exactly what the mathematics say you need. That's not what I meant. She knew what he meant. The tension that had been building between them since that night before the challenge, the careful distance they maintained in public, the way his presence in a room made her hyper-aware of her own breathing. But this wasn't the time. Not with wolves starving, not with impossible choices pressing down on both of them. I know, she said, but it's the only answer I can give right now. The pack meeting that evening was brutal. Jake announced the new ration reductions. The crowd erupted immediately, shouting, accusations, wolves demanding to know why they were starving when there were still stockpiles in the storage facility. Because we need those stockpiles to last, Jake said, his voice cutting through the noise. Winter isn't even here yet. We have months to survive before spring. If we eat everything now, we die later. We're dying now, someone shouted. You're hungry, Brandy said from her position at the edge of the platform. There's a difference. Easy for you to say, Dick called out. He stood in the center of the crowd, playing to them like always. You're the one controlling the food. How do we know you're not keeping extra for yourself? Because I'm eating the same rations as everyone else, Brandy said evenly. Oh, which you'd know if you bothered to check instead of making accusations. Then why is my nephew getting less than others? Dick gestured to Danny, who stood with his friends looking sullen and underfed. He's a young wolf. He needs more food. But somehow his allocation is smaller than wolves half his size. His allocation, Brandy said, reflects the 15 pounds of preserved meat he stole from my racks 6 weeks ago. He already ate his extra rations. Now he's eating what's left. The crowd went silent. Danny's face flushed red. That's a lie, he said. Is it? Because I have dates, times, and witnesses. Would you like me to provide them publicly, or would you prefer to accept your reduced rations quietly? Danny looked to Dick, who looked furious but trapped. To challenge her claim would require proof. And if Brandy had witnesses, which her face suggested she did, it would only make things worse. This is exactly the problem, Dick said instead, pivoting smoothly. She's using food as a weapon, punishing wolves she doesn't like, rewarding wolves who support her. This isn't resource management, it's manipulation. Then you manage it, Brandy said coldly. You want control of the distribution? Fine, take it. I'll hand you the ledgers right now. You can spend the next 3 months calculating exactly how to keep 247 wolves alive on resources that can barely sustain half that number. You can make the choices about who gets less and who gets more. You can be the one wolves blame when their children cry from hunger. She stepped forward. Or you can shut up and let me do the job your alpha appointed me to do. The silence that followed was absolute. Dick's face had gone dark. You don't speak to me like that. I speak to you exactly like that, Brandy said, because I'm the only one keeping this pack alive, and you're trying to undermine me for political points while wolves starve. So either challenge my numbers with better numbers or get out of my way. Jake stepped forward before Dick could respond. Enough, both of you. He looked at the crowd. The rations are what they are. If anyone has evidence of mismanagement or favoritism, bring it to me directly. And otherwise, we follow Brandy's distribution schedule. Those are my orders. Your orders, Dick said quietly, are becoming increasingly difficult to follow when they prioritize an Omega's judgment over the pack's survival instincts. The pack's survival instincts, Jake said, his voice dropping into something dangerous, are what got us into this situation. comfortable denial, refusing to prepare, mocking the one person who saw what was coming. So forgive me if I trust her judgment over the collective wisdom that spent 6 months laughing while she dried meat. The crowd began to disperse, wolves muttering among themselves. Brandy could feel the resentment radiating off them. Not all, but enough. Enough to be dangerous. She'd saved them, and they hated her for it. That night, the first wolf died. Old Harold. He'd been sick for weeks, some kind of wasting illness that had nothing to do with the famine, but everything to do with timing. His body, already weakened, couldn't survive on reduced rations. Brandy stood at the edge of the burial, watching them lower him into the frozen ground. She'd known Harold. Not well, but enough. He'd been one of the ones who laughed at her preparations, not cruel about it, just dismissive. Another voice in the chorus of comfortable denial. She'd allocated him standard elderly rations, exactly what her calculations said he needed to survive if he was healthy. He hadn't been healthy. Should she have given him more? Could she have, without taking it from someone else who might die without it? The mathematics didn't have an answer for that. Jake found her afterward, standing alone at the edge of the burial ground. "It's not your fault," he said. "I know, but it's going to happen again." She looked at him. "More wolves will die, and every single one, people will ask if I could have saved them. If I'd allocated differently, prioritized differently, I'd chosen differently." "And could you?" "Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes I don't know." Her voice cracked slightly. "My mother never told me how she lived with it. The weight of knowing every choice you make costs someone something." Jake moved closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cold air. "She lived with it by knowing she did the best she could with impossible options, same as you're doing now." "Is it enough?" "It has to be." They stood together in the darkness, surrounded by dying land and dying wolves, carrying the weight of choices neither of them wanted to make. And somewhere in the distance, the first snow began to fall. Chapter 7, The Cost of Being Right. 3 wolves died the first week of rationing, 7 the second. By the third week, Brandy stopped counting graves and started counting the living. It was easier. Jake stopped looking at her like she was brilliant and started looking at her like she was necessary. She wasn't sure which was worse. The storage facility had become her entire world. She woke before dawn, walked the frozen path to the barn, and spent her days managing the slow mathematics of starvation. Who got what? When? How much? Every decision, a calculation. Every calculation a choice about who suffered more. The work had made her numb in a way she recognized from her mother's final months before the exile. Not cold exactly, just distant, removed. The emotional equivalent of frostbite. You stopped feeling the pain because feeling it would kill you. "Brandy!" She looked up from her ledger to find Paige standing in the doorway. Jake's niece had been helping with distribution for 2 weeks now, learning the systems, running the numbers. She was smart, quick, and currently holding a requisition form with shaking hands. "What is it?" "Mrs. Morrison is requesting additional rations for her daughter. She's nursing and her milk is drying up." Paige's voice was carefully controlled, but Brandy could hear the strain underneath. "I checked the calculations. We can't spare it. And not without reducing someone else's allocation." "Then we reduce someone else's allocation." "That's—" Paige stopped. "Who?" Brandy took the form, scanned it, did the mental arithmetic. "Cut 5% from the single adults in the Eastern Quarter. Redistribute to nursing mothers. It won't be enough to solve the problem, but it'll help." "Those adults are already on minimum rations." "I know. Some of them will get weaker, might get sick." "I know that too." Brandy met Paige's eyes. This is the job. Someone always suffers. We just decide who and how much." Paige was quiet for a moment, processing this. She was 17, old enough to understand hard truths, but young enough to still be shaken by them. Brandy remembered that age, before her mother's exile, when she'd still believed the world could be fair if people just tried hard enough. She'd learned better. "How do you do this?" Paige asked quietly. "How do you choose?" "I prioritize survival of the pack as a whole. At children first because they're the future. Nursing mothers because their children die without them. Then I calculate who else can afford to lose calories without dying. She paused. And sometimes I make guesses. And sometimes I'm wrong. And someone dies who might not have if I'd chosen differently. That's awful. Yes. Brandy returned to her ledger. Do you want to process the redistribution or should I? Paige stared at her for a long moment, then took the form back. I'll do it. After she left, Brandy sat alone in the cold storage facility and let herself feel it. The weight, the guilt, the grinding exhaustion of being right, of knowing that if she'd prepared less, more would be dead, and knowing that even with all her preparation, wolves were dying anyway. Being right didn't feel like vindication. It felt like drowning slowly while everyone watched. The attacks started in the 4th week. Nothing dramatic, just small acts of sabotage, and a lock broken on one of the storage rooms. Nothing stolen, just the violation of knowing someone had tried. Spoiled meat left near her cottage door, rotting deliberately. The smell a message. Anonymous threats scratched into the bark of trees she passed daily. Omega bitch, let you starve last. Your mother knew what she deserved. She reported none of it. What would be the point? Jake had enough to manage without adding her personal safety to his list. And the pack's resentment was logical, as even if it was misdirected. She was the face of their suffering. Every reduced ration, every empty stomach, every crying child. She was the one who measured it, calculated it, made it official. The fact that she was saving them didn't matter. Humans, wolves, needed someone to blame. So they blamed her. On the 28th day of rationing, she found Ida waiting at the storage facility at dawn. You look terrible, Ida said bluntly. I'm fine. You're not eating enough. Shed, I can see it. The older woman's face was stern. You're giving your portions away, aren't you? Brandy didn't answer, which was answer enough. Stupid girl. Ida's voice was sharp, but not unkind. You can't save anyone if you starve yourself. There are children who need it more. There are children who need you alive and functional more. Ida grabbed her arm, gently but firm. Your mother made the same mistake. Gave herself away piece by piece until there was nothing left. Don't do that. My mother was exiled before she could starve. Your mother stopped eating weeks before that. I watched her fade. I watched her choose everyone else over herself until she was too weak to fight back when they came for her. Ida's grip tightened. You want to honor her memory? Then survive. Don't martyr yourself for wolves who won't appreciate it until you're dead. After Ida left, Brandy sat with that. Yet the uncomfortable truth that her mother's greatest weakness hadn't been being right too early. It had been caring too much about people who didn't care back. She pulled out her personal ration from the storage, the same amount she allocated to other single adults, and forced herself to eat it. All of it. It felt like theft, like selfishness, like every bite was coming from a child's mouth. But she ate it anyway, because Ida was right. Dead martyrs didn't save anyone. And Jake came to her that evening, after the distribution was complete and the facility was quiet. We need to talk, he said. She knew that tone. It was his alpha voice, the one that meant difficult decisions and no good options. How bad? Morris died this morning. That makes 12 total. Jake's face was drawn. The council is demanding changes to the rationing system. They want to prioritize ranked wolves, warriors, administrators, essential personnel. Let me guess, a dick is leading that demand. Yes. Jake leaned against the storage shelves, looking exhausted. His argument is that if the ranked wolves weaken, we can't defend the territory or maintain order. We'll collapse from within. His argument, Brandy said carefully, is designed to ensure he and his allies don't suffer while everyone else starves. It has nothing to do with pack survival. I know, but he's not entirely wrong about the defense concern. If we're attacked while the warriors are weakened, we're not going to be attacked, Brandy interrupted. Every territory around us is facing the same famine. No one has the resources to wage war. They're all trying to survive. You can't know that. I can project it with reasonable certainty based on environmental data. She crossed her arms. The crop failures aren't local. The water scarcity isn't local. This is regional collapse, possibly wider. which means every pack is in the same position we are, and starving wolves don't invade. They migrate or they die. Jake was quiet, processing this. You're saying we're safe because everyone else is suffering too. I'm saying the threat profile has changed. We don't need warriors at full strength right now. We need children who'll rebuild when this is over. We need nursing mothers who'll repopulate. We need healers and engineers and anyone with skills that matter for long-term survival. She met his eyes. Dick wants to prioritize warriors because he's a warrior. It's self-interest dressed up as strategy. And if I deny his request, he'll say I'm prioritizing my personal loyalties over pack safety. He'll say that anyway. He's been saying it for weeks. Brandy moved closer. You appointed me because I know how to make these calculations without politics, so let me make them. Yeah, the rationing stays as is. Jake studied her for a long moment. You know this is destroying you. I can see it. What's the alternative? Give up? Let Dick take over and watch him allocate food based on who's politically useful to him? She shook her head. I'm doing the job you gave me. The fact that it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong. It's more than hard. You're carrying the weight of every death, every reduction, every impossible choice, and you're doing it alone. I'm not alone. I have Paige. I have Ida. I have... She stopped. You have me, Jake said quietly. He reached out, his hand settling on her shoulder. The contact was warm, solid, the first gentle touch she'd felt in weeks. You've always had me. Brandy looked up at him, at this man who'd defended her when it cost him, who stood between her and the pack's rage every day, who looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. Jake! The door burst open. Raymond, the headhunter, stumbled in, his face pale. Alpha, we have a problem. The eastern border was burning, not literally. There was too much snow for actual fire. But the emergency signal fires were lit, which meant only one thing. Someone was coming. Brandy stood on the eastern ridge beside Jake, watching the tree line. Behind them, the pack's remaining warriors assembled in loose formation, armed but obviously weakened. Weeks of reduced rations showed in their movements, slower, less coordinated, and the physical deterioration impossible to hide. How many? Jake asked. Unknown, Raymond said. The forward scouts reported movement but couldn't get close enough for a count. Could be raiders, could be refugees. Or it could be my father, Brandy said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at her. Your father? Jake's voice was carefully controlled. You've never mentioned a father. Because he left before I was born. Once walked away when my mother started acting crazy about the environmental signs. Brandy kept her eyes on the tree line. But I know where he went. The Black Ridge Pack, Eastern Territory. And if the famine hit there like it hit here, they're out of options. You think they're coming to raid our supplies? I think they're desperate, same as we are. And desperate wolves don't ask politely. As if summoned by her words, figures emerged from the tree line. 30 of them, maybe more. All moving with the careful formation of people who knew how to fight, but were too weak to do it well. At their head was a wolf. Brandy had only seen once, in a faded photograph her mother had kept hidden. Tall, broad-shouldered, with white blonde hair, the same color as Brandy's, and eyes that were currently assessing the ridge with tactical precision. That's him, she said. That's Adrian. Jake's hand moved to his weapon. If they attack, they won't! Not yet! Brandy stepped forward, and making herself visible. They'll want to negotiate first, and when they do, I'll handle it. Brandy, he's here because of me. My mother's bloodline, the fact that I survived where others didn't. He'll want to talk to me specifically. She looked at Jake. Trust me. It wasn't really a question, more like a test. Jake held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Raymond, hold position, defensive formation, but no one attacks unless I give the order. He looked at Brandy. We'll negotiate. But I'm coming with you. They walked down the ridge together, toward the man who'd abandoned Brandy's mother and was now coming back because he needed what that mother's daughter had built. Adrian stopped 20 feet away, Up close, Brandy could see the resemblance, the bone structure, the set of the jaw, the particular shade of gray in his eyes. She looked like him. She'd spent her whole life looking like the man who'd left her mother to die alone. "You're the daughter," Adrian said. Not a question. Statement of fact. "Yes. She taught you well. I've been watching your operation. Impressive." His voice carried approval, like he had any right to it. "Your mother always had a gift for seeing patterns. Glad to know it passed down." "My mother," Brandy said coldly, "died alone because you refused to believe her. So let's skip the part where you pretend you're proud of me and get to the part where you explain why you're here." Adrian's expression didn't change. "Fair enough." We're starving. Our stores ran out 2 weeks ago. We've lost 40 wolves to famine. I heard rumors that someone in this territory had prepared, that an Omega had stockpiles." He smiled, thin and humorless. "I should have known it would be her daughter." "What do you want?" "An alliance. We have warriors, weakened but still functional. You have food. We protect you. You feed us. Simple exchange." "We don't need protection," Jake said. And we barely have enough food for our own pack." Adrian's eyes shifted to Jake, assessing. "You're the alpha, the one who actually listened to her." Something like respect crossed his face. "Smarter than I was, but you're wrong about not needing protection. The Western packs are collapsing. When they do, they'll come here, and you don't have enough warriors to hold them off, not in your current state." "And you do? We have experience. We have numbers. And we're willing to fight for food in a way your well-fed wolves never learned." Adrian looked back at Brandy. "Your mother would want this. She'd want the bloodlines to survive." "My mother," Brandy said, her voice shaking with controlled rage, "would want you to suffer the way you made her suffer. She'd want you to know what it feels like to be right and alone and abandoned by everyone who should have believed you." "Probably true." Adrian didn't flinch. But she'd also be practical enough to recognize when survival requires working with people you hate. Question is, are you?" Brandy looked at him. This man who was half her DNA and none of her loyalty. This stranger who shared her features but none of her history. This calculating, ruthless wolf who'd come back not out of regret, but out of necessity. And she thought about the mathematics. 30 more mouths to feed, but 30 more bodies to defend the territory. 30 more wolves who might mean the difference between survival and collapse if the Western packs really did turn raider. The numbers were close. Too close to decide on emotion alone. "I need to see your supplies," she said. "Your inventory, your capabilities, your actual warrior strength. I need data." Adrian smiled. Like mother, like daughter. Always the numbers first. He gestured to his wolves. "We'll camp at the border tonight. Tomorrow, we'll talk logistics." "But Brandy," he met her eyes. "I know I have no right to ask this, but your mother was the best person I ever knew, and I was too stupid and too scared to believe her. Don't make my mistake. Don't let pride kill you when survival is right in front of you." After they left, Jake turned to her. "Do you trust him?" "No," Brandy said immediately, "but trust isn't required for alliance, just mutual necessity. And if he's lying about his capabilities? If he's planning to take our supplies by force once he's inside our territory? Then we'll deal with it." She looked up at him. "But right now, the mathematics say we need the help, even if it comes from him." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "This is going to break you. Adding his pack to yours, managing the politics, negotiating with the man who abandoned your mother." "I'm already broken," Brandy said quietly. "I've been broken since the day my mother walked into those woods and never came back. I'm just still functioning. There's a difference." That night, alone in her cottage, Brandy finally let herself cry. Not for long, just enough to release the pressure that had been building in her chest for weeks. Then she dried her eyes, updated her ledgers to account for potential alliance logistics, and calculated exactly how much survival would cost. The answer, as always, was more than she wanted to pay. But she'd pay it anyway, because being right meant nothing if you didn't survive long enough to prove it. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you believe women like Brandy, The ones who prepare while everyone laughs, who save the ungrateful, who carry impossible weight, deserve more than silence. She deserved better. So give her your support now. Chapter 8. The Raider's Hunger. The worst thing about starving wolves is that they can smell when other wolves are starving too. And hunger recognizes hunger. The Black Ridge Pack hadn't come to trade. They'd come to take. Brandy realized it 3 days into the alliance when she caught one of Adrian's wolves, a lean male named Stuart, near the main storage facility after dark. He'd claimed he was lost, looking for the latrine, but his eyes had tracked the barn's door. The lock? The guard rotation with too much precision for confusion. He was scouting, learning their defenses, preparing. She said nothing, just smiled politely, directed him to the actual latrines, and watched him leave. Then she went directly to Jake. "They're planning to raid us," she said without preamble. Jake looked up from the maps he'd been studying. It was late, well past midnight, but neither of them slept much anymore. Crisis had a way of burning through the need for rest. You're certain?" "I caught one of them surveying the storage facility. He was memorizing our guard patterns." She moved to the table, pointing to the map. "They've been camping here, at the eastern border for 3 days, long enough to observe our routines, identify our weak points, understand exactly how depleted our warriors are. That doesn't prove raid intent. Could be standard defensive reconnaissance. Or it could be exactly what it looks like." Brandy met his eyes. My father didn't come here for alliance. He came because he knew his daughter would have stockpiles, knew we'd be too weakened to defend them properly, and figured he could take what he needed through negotiation or force, whichever worked better." Jake's jaw tightened. "If they attack the storage facility, we lose everything. All the supplies, all the organization, months of preparation destroyed in one night." She paused. "Unless we move it first." "Move 2 months of food supplies? In secret? While they're watching?" "Not in secret, in plain sight." Brandy pulled out a separate map, one she'd been marking up for the past hour. "We announce a redistribution, say we're consolidating the storage to improve efficiency, make it look like standard logistics. Meanwhile, we move the real stockpiles to the cave system behind my cottage, the one only a handful of people know exists." Jake studied the map. "That cave system is on the far western edge of the territory. It's defensible. But it's also isolated. If they figure out what we're doing, they won't, because we'll leave enough in the main facility to look legitimate, enough to raid, if that's what they want." Her voice was cold, calculated. "Let them take the bait, and when they do, we'll know exactly who we're dealing with." "You're using our food supplies as bait." "I'm using a portion of our supplies to protect the majority. It's risk management." She looked at him directly. Unless you have a better strategy for dealing with 30 wolves who might be planning to kill us in our sleep." Jake was quiet for a long moment. She could see him working through the options, the calculations, the same impossible mathematics she'd been running for months. Every choice a compromise, every compromise a cost. "All right," he said finally. "We move the supplies, but we do it carefully. As in we keep enough warriors positioned to respond if things go wrong. We barely have enough warriors to guard 1 facility, let alone 2. Then we'll use what we have strategically." He stood, moving closer to her. "Brandy, if this goes badly, if they raid, if people die—" "People are already dying," she said quietly. "At least this way, we control which people and how many." The relocation took 4 days. They moved slowly, methodically, making it look like routine reorganization. Paige helped, along with Ida and a few others Brandy trusted. The cave system behind her cottage was larger than most people realized. 3 interconnected chambers with natural shelving formations and good air circulation. Her mother had discovered it years ago, had planned to use it exactly like this if the need ever arose. Brandy was simply finishing what her mother had started. By the 4th night, they'd moved 60% of the real stockpiles. As the main facility still looked full, careful arrangement, strategic spacing, enough actual food mixed with the appearance of abundance to fool anyone who wasn't counting closely. Adrian visited that evening, ostensibly to discuss warrior training schedules. "Your organization is impressive," he said, walking through the main facility with Brandy. His eyes cataloged everything: shelf heights, door positions, the spacing between the guards. Your mother would be proud. Would she? Brandy kept her voice neutral. Or would she be furious that you're here pretending to care about her legacy? Adrian stopped walking. For the first time since he'd arrived, his carefully controlled expression cracked slightly. I cared about her. I just didn't believe her. Same thing, in the end. No. He turned to face her fully. I was a coward. There's a difference between not caring and being too afraid to face the truth. And I chose comfort over her. I chose my reputation, my position, my pride, and she paid the price. He paused. If I could go back— You can't, Brandy interrupted. So let's stop pretending this is about redemption or regret, or whatever story you're telling yourself. You're here because you need food, and you think I'm foolish enough to give it to you. Am I wrong? About me being foolish? Yes. About needing food? She gestured to the shelves around them. Everyone needs food. And the question is what you're willing to do to get it. Adrian studied her with an expression that might have been approval or might have been calculation. You're like her, but harder. She never learned to protect herself properly. You have. I had to. No one else was going to do it. He nodded slowly, accepting that. The alliance proposal still stands. We can help each other, or we can be enemies. Your choice. It was never my choice, Brandy said. It was yours. At the moment you decided whether to raid us or actually negotiate in good faith. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, that she'd stated it so directly. And you think I've decided to raid? I think you've kept your options open, which amounts to the same thing. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, thin and sharp. Smart girl. Your mother raised you right, even if I wasn't there to help. He left before she could respond. Brandy stood alone in the storage facility, as surrounded by supplies that were mostly illusion, and felt the cold certainty settle in her chest. The raid was coming, tonight or tomorrow or the next day, but soon. She went to find Jake. The attack came at dawn, when the sky was just beginning to lighten and the guards were at their most exhausted. Brandy was already awake. She was always awake these days, sleep being something she did in brief, fitful installments between crises. Well, she heard the first shouts from her cottage window and was moving before her conscious mind fully processed what was happening. Outside, chaos. Adrian's wolves pouring through the eastern perimeter, heading directly for the main storage facility. Not subtle, not careful, just fast and brutal, and exactly what she'd expected. She ran toward the facility, her heart pounding. The guards were fighting, outnumbered but holding, trying to protect supplies they didn't know were mostly decoy. And Jake was already there, coordinating the defense. He saw her, and his face went hard with fear. "Get to safety!" he shouted. "No!" She moved past him, into the facility. If Adrian's wolves got inside, if they realized the stockpiles were mostly empty, they'd start searching. They'd find the cave system. Everything would be lost, unless she gave them what they came for. She grabbed armfuls of the remaining food, the bait she'd left deliberately, and started throwing it toward the entrance. Making it easy, making it look like panic, like desperation, like exactly the kind of mistake a frightened Omega would make under pressure. "Take it!" she screamed at the raiders. "Just take it and leave!" Adrian appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. His eyes met hers, and for one brief moment she saw him understand. Saw him realize that she'd known, that she'd planned for this, that she was giving him exactly enough to make him leave without giving him everything. "Ma, fall back," he ordered his wolves. "We got what we came for." They retreated, carrying the food she'd sacrificed, leaving the facility damaged but not destroyed. The guards pursued for a few yards, then stopped at Jake's signal. It was over in less than 10 minutes. Brandy stood in the wrecked facility, breathing hard, surrounded by overturned shelves and scattered supplies. Jake appeared beside her, checking her for injuries with hands that shook slightly. "Are you hurt?" "No." She looked at the damage, calculating. They took maybe 15% of our actual stores, less than I'd allocated for the bait. You planned for them to take food. I planned for them to take the minimum necessary to make the raid feel successful while protecting the majority. She looked up at him. It worked. Jake stared at her for a long moment. You knew this was coming. You prepared for it. And you let me think we might actually have an alliance because you needed to believe it was possible. You needed to try negotiation before force. That's who you are. She touched his face briefly. I prepared for who Adrian actually is. The man who abandons people when belief gets hard. He's your father. Genetically. Her voice was flat. That doesn't make him family. Raymond appeared, reporting casualties. 2 guards injured, neither critically. Property damage, but no deaths. As it could have been catastrophic, it wasn't, because Brandy had planned for betrayal the way other people planned for cooperation. Later, after the facility was secured and the guards posted, Jake found her at the cave system. She was doing inventory, updating her ledgers, calculating exactly how the raid had affected their timeline. We have 62 days of supplies left, she said without looking up, assuming no more raids, no major losses, and strict adherence to rationing. Well, spring is 73 days away. We're 11 days short. Yes. Jake sat down beside her on the cold cave floor. Can we stretch it? Not without casualties. Some wolves will starve in those final days. Children, hopefully not. But adults. She set down her quill. We need to reduce rations again, tomorrow. The pack will revolt. The pack will survive. Maybe not all of them, but enough. She finally looked at him. That's all we can do, Jake. Enough. Not everyone. Not perfect. Just enough to rebuild when this is over. He was quiet for a long moment. I hate this. I know. I hate that you have to make these choices. I hate that you're right. I hate that being right means watching people die anyway. His voice cracked slightly. And I hate that I put this on you. You didn't put it on me. I took it. There's a difference. She moved closer to him, letting their shoulders touch. My mother taught me that being right when everyone else is wrong is a specific kind of hell, but it's still better than the alternative. Which is? Being wrong when everyone else is too. At least this way, some of us survive. Jake turned to look at her. Really look at her, in the dim cave light. His hand came up to her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so large. When this is over, he said quietly. When we've survived and rebuilt and gotten through the worst of it. Don't, Brandy said. Don't make promises about after. We don't know if there is an after. There will be, because you planned for it. His eyes were intense on hers. And when it comes, I'm going to ask you something. And I need you to know now, before I ask, that the answer can be no. That you can say no and nothing changes between us. Jake, let me finish. His hand was still on her face, warm and steady. I'm going to ask you to be my mate, officially. Not because you saved the pack, not because I need you politically, but because I've spent 6 months watching you carry impossible weight with more grace than anyone I've ever met. Because you're brilliant and ruthless and compassionate in ways that shouldn't be possible together but are. Because when I think about the future, the only version that makes sense is the one where you're in it. Brandy felt her chest tighten. That's not a very good political alliance. Omega and Alpha. I don't care about politics. You're the Alpha. You have to care about politics. Then I'll care about them tomorrow. Right now, in this cave, with 11 days between us and starvation, I'm choosing to care about this instead. He leaned his forehead against hers. Tell me you feel it too. Tell me I'm not imagining this. She closed her eyes, let herself feel the warmth of him, and the solid presence that had been steady through every crisis. You're not imagining it. Good. He pulled back slightly, smiled that rare, full smile she'd only seen a handful of times. Then survive with me. We'll get through the next 11 days, and the days after that, and however many more it takes. And when we do, I'm going to ask you properly. You're assuming I'll say yes. I'm hoping you'll say yes. There's a difference. Despite everything, the hunger, the deaths, At the impossible mathematics of survival. Brandy laughed. It felt strange, foreign, like a muscle she'd forgotten how to use, but it felt good. Chapter 9. The Thaw. Spring came. The land remembered how to give. The pack remembered how to breathe. But no one remembered how to look at Brandy without seeing the wolves who weren't there. 15 wolves had died during the famine. 15 names Brandy had written in her ledger with careful notation of date, age, and contributing factors. 15 graves in the frozen ground. 15 families who looked at her now with expressions she couldn't quite categorize. Not quite gratitude, not quite resentment, something complicated in between. She'd saved 232 wolves. They remembered the 15 she hadn't. The first successful hunt happened on day 71. The hunting party returned with 3 deer, thin but alive, proof that the herds were returning to the valley. The pack celebrated with restrained relief, the kind of joy that comes from surviving something you weren't sure you would. Brandy watched from the edge of the gathering, updating her calculations. 3 deer meant approximately 180 pounds of usable meat. Enough to supplement rations for a week, maybe less if people stopped following the distribution schedule now that fresh food was available. "You should be celebrating with them," Paige said, appearing beside her. Jake's niece looked healthier now, the hollows under her eyes filling in, color returning to her face. She'd lost weight during the famine, like everyone, but she'd survived. And the young ones mostly had. "I'm working." "You're always working." Paige looked at the ledger. "When's the last time you did something that wasn't calculating or distributing or managing?" Brandy thought about it. "I don't remember. That's not healthy. Neither is starvation. I prioritized accordingly." Paige was quiet for a moment. "The pack is planning a memorial for the ones we lost. They want you to speak." "No." "Brandy, I said no." She closed the ledger. "I'm not the right person to eulogize wolves who died despite my preparations. Let Jake speak, or Dick, or anyone who didn't spend the last 6 months deciding who got to eat. You saved us." "I managed resources. It's not the same thing." "To us it is." Paige's voice was earnest, the kind of earnestness that only 17-year-olds still had. "You're a hero, Brandy. Everyone knows that." Brandy looked at the gathering crowd, at the wolves laughing and eating and celebrating survival. She saw Danny among them. Thinner, quieter than before, but alive. She saw Dick talking with the council members, already politicking. She saw Ida with her grandchildren, all of them laughing at something. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd made impossible choices and gotten lucky that most of them worked out. "Heroes," she said quietly, "don't keep lists of who they saved and who they didn't. Heroes don't reduce rations to children because the mathematics demanded it. Heroes don't stand in caves calculating which wolves can afford to die." She met Paige's eyes. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who knew what was coming and prepared accordingly." "Then what does that make Uncle Jake? He's calling you the pack seer. He's making it an official position." That stopped Brandy cold. "He's what?" "Creating a position. Pack seer. Permanent authority over food logistics, resource management, and long-term planning. Full council seat, ranked status. At the whole structure." Paige smiled. "He's announcing it at the memorial. I thought you knew." Brandy stood abruptly. "I need to talk to him." She found Jake in his residence, reviewing documents with Raymond. He looked up when she entered, saw her expression, and dismissed Raymond with a gesture. "You can't make me pack seer," Brandy said before he could speak. "I can. I'm doing it tomorrow. Jake, you saved this pack. And you deserve official recognition and the authority to prevent this from happening again." His voice was firm, alpha certain. "The position comes with ranked status, council seat, and resources to maintain permanent stockpiles. It's not optional." "Everything is optional. I can refuse." "You can, but you won't." He moved closer. "Because you know as well as I do that if you don't have official authority, the next time signs appear, the pack will ignore you the same way they ignored your mother. Yet the position protects you, it protects them, and it ensures this never happens again." Brandy wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. Without official status, she was still just an Omega who got lucky. With it, she was infrastructure. permanent, undeniable. The pack will hate it, Dick especially. Dick lost 15 pack members on his watch because he refused to listen to you. His political capital is diminished. Yours is ascendant. Jake's expression softened slightly. Let me do this. Let me give you what you earned. I don't want ranked status. I want... She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. What? His voice was gentle now. What do you want? She looked at him. This man who'd supported her through everything, who'd stood between her and the pack's rage, who'd made space for her competence in a hierarchy that had no place for it, who'd told her in a cave that he was going to ask her to be his mate when this was over. I want it to be over, she said quietly. I want to stop making choices about who lives and who dies. I want to sleep without calculating. I want... Her voice cracked. I want to not be responsible anymore. Jake crossed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. She went stiffly at first. Physical comfort was something she'd forgotten how to accept, but his warmth was relentless, and eventually she softened into it. It is over, he said against her hair. The famine is ending. The hunting is returning. You did it. And you can rest now. Can I? She pulled back to look at him. Or am I just moving from crisis management to permanent preparedness? Building stockpiles, training successors, watching for the next disaster? If that's what you choose, but it doesn't have to consume you the way the last 6 months did, you can have help. Paige is already trained. We can assign others. You can distribute the weight instead of carrying it alone. I don't know how to do that. Then learn. He touched her face, and that same gentle gesture that still surprised her every time. You learned how to survive being right when everyone else was wrong. You can learn this too. The memorial happened 3 days later. The pack gathered at the burial ground, where 15 stones marked 15 graves. Jake spoke first, naming each wolf, honoring their memory, acknowledging the loss. His voice was steady, controlled, the alpha providing certainty in the face of grief. Then he called Brandy forward. As she approached the platform with reluctance, feeling the weight of 232 gazes on her, the survivors, the ones whose names weren't on stones. I won't tell you I did my best, she said, because lies weren't useful and false comfort even less so. I made calculations. I distributed resources. I chose who got more and who got less. Some of those choices saved lives. Some of them didn't save enough. The crowd was silent, watching her. Morris died because I couldn't give him the extra nutrition his illness required without taking it from nursing mothers. Harold died because I prioritized children over elderly. 3 others died in the final weeks because I'd miscalculated how long the famine would last. She paused. I can give you reasons for every choice. I can show you the mathematics, but I can't give you back the wolves we lost. Someone in the crowd, she thought it might be Betty, started crying quietly. Oh, your alpha is making me pack seer, Brandy continued. Permanent authority over resource management, which means next time, and there will be a next time, because the land cycles through abundance and scarcity in patterns we can predict if we're willing to look. I'll be the one making these choices again, and some of you will hate me for it, and some wolves will die anyway. She looked out at the crowd. But more of you will live. That's all I can promise. Not perfection, not 0 casualties, and just better odds than you'd have without preparation. She stepped back. The crowd remained silent for a long moment. Then Ida started clapping. It was slow, deliberate, the kind of applause that wasn't about celebration, but acknowledgement. Others joined, not everyone, not even most, but enough. Paige, Raymond, some of the mothers whose children had survived, the wolves who'd seen what Brandy had done and understood the cost of it. Dick didn't clap, neither did Danny or their supporters. But they didn't challenge either. It was enough. Jake approached afterward while people were dispersing. That wasn't a particularly comforting speech. I'm not particularly comforting. No. He smiled slightly. But you're honest, and after 6 months of crisis, honesty is more valuable than comfort. They walked together toward her cottage. The spring air was cool, clean, carrying the scent of new growth. The land was recovering, the pack was rebuilding, and Brandy felt, and for the first time in months, like she might be able to breathe without calculating how much oxygen was left. "The council meets in 2 days to formalize your position," Jake said. "There will be resistance. Dick will argue against it, but I have the votes. And if you didn't? Then I'd use alpha authority and deal with the political consequences." He looked at her. "You're not optional to me, Brandy. Not your competence, not your position, and not—" He paused. Not you." They'd reached her cottage. The drying racks were gone now, taken down when the famine ended. But the cave system behind the building was still stocked, still organized, still ready for the next crisis. Some preparations were permanent. "Come inside," Brandy said. He followed her in. The cottage was small, worn, but it was hers. The place she'd survived in, planned in, made impossible choices in, and now she was inviting him into it, deliberately, consciously. She turned to face him. Ask me." Jake went very still. "Now? You said when it was over. It's over. The famine ended. The pack survived. We're here." She moved closer. "So ask me." He studied her face, searching for something. Certainty, maybe, or readiness. Whatever he saw, it seemed to satisfy him because he took her hands in his and spoke with that careful honesty she'd come to recognize as his truest self. "Brandy Connor, Pack Seer, Omega who redefined what Omega means. A woman who saved us when we didn't deserve saving. Will you be my mate? Not because I need you politically, not because the Pack expects it, but because I love you. Because you're brilliant and ruthless and somehow still compassionate despite every reason not to be. Because when I imagine the future, you're in every version of it that matters." Brandy felt something in her chest crack open. Not break. Open. Like a window in a room that had been closed too long. "No," she said. Jake's face went carefully neutral, but she saw the hurt flash through his eyes before he controlled it. "Not yet," she clarified quickly. "Not like this. Not coming off crisis. Not with everything still complicated and raw and uncertain. Brandy, listen." She squeezed his hands. "I need to know this is real. That you want me because of who I am, not because of what I did. And that you're not asking out of guilt or gratitude or because 6 months of crisis made everything feel more intense than it actually is." She paused. "I watched my mother accept love from a man who left when things got hard. I won't make that mistake. I need to know you'll stay." "I will. Prove it." She looked up at him. "Give me time. Let me settle into this position, figure out who I am when I'm not in crisis mode. Let us figure out what we are when we're not fighting to survive. And then," she smiled slightly, "then ask me again, when we're both sure." Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "How long?" "As long as it takes. A season. A year. However long we need to be certain." "I'm already certain." "Then you won't mind waiting for me to catch up." He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her, and held on like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. "I'll wait," he said against her hair. "However long it takes." "Oh, but Brandy?" "Yes?" "I'm not your father. I'm not leaving. Crisis or calm, prepared or desperate, I'm here. And I'll keep being here until you believe it." She held on to him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady heartbeat against her cheek. And for the first time since her mother walked into the woods and never came back, Brandy let herself imagine a future where being right didn't mean being alone. It was terrifying. It was also, possibly, worth believing in. Chapter 10. The Legacy of Hunger. 2 years after the famine, Brandy Connor still dried meat every autumn. Not because she was afraid, because she was responsible. There's a difference. She stood in the eastern field on a cool September morning, supervising the construction of the new preservation facility. Not the makeshift operation she'd built during the crisis, but a permanent structure. Stone walls, proper ventilation, dedicated storage chambers designed to maintain food supplies year-round. The pack had fought it at first. Dick especially arguing that permanent preparation was wasteful, that they should trust in abundance now that the land had recovered. But Jake had pushed it through council with Brandy's full support, and now it stood as physical proof that the pack had learned something from nearly starving, or at least some of them had learned. "The northern wall needs reinforcement," Paige said, appearing beside her with a ledger. She was 19 now, taller and more confident, and serving as Brandy's official apprentice in the pack-seer role. "The engineers say the current support won't handle the weight once we're at full capacity. Then we reinforce it, add it to the construction schedule." Brandy made a note in her own ledger. "What about the cave system? Is the new ventilation working?" "Perfectly. The air circulation is maintaining optimal humidity levels. We can store twice what we did during the famine without spoilage concerns." Paige paused. "Brandy, can I ask you something?" "You're going to anyway. Do you ever stop preparing? Do you ever look at what we've built and think, that's enough?" Brandy considered the question honestly. The truth was complicated. They had 4 months of food stores now, maintained year-round. They had trained teams for preservation, distribution, and crisis management. They had systems, protocols, redundancies. It should have been enough. "No," she said finally. "Yeah, because enough implies you've prepared for every possible scenario, and you can't. There's always something you didn't anticipate, some variable you didn't factor in. The best you can do is prepare for what you can predict and stay flexible for what you can't." That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also why 232 wolves are alive today instead of buried in the eastern field. Paige was quiet for a moment, then smiled slightly. Uncle Jake says you've gotten better at delegating." "Your Uncle Jake has opinions about many things. He also says you're still avoiding his question." Brandy shot her a look. "We're not discussing that." "Why not? Everyone knows he wants to mate with you. Everyone knows you want it too. What's the holdup?" "The holdup," Brandy said carefully, "is that I spent the first 30 years of my life learning not to need anyone. Unlearning that takes time." "It's been 2 years." "I'm aware." "So when are you going to say yes?" Brandy set down her ledger and looked at Paige directly. "When I'm certain. When I know it's not just crisis bonding or gratitude or the aftermath of trauma making us think we need each other more than we do. When I can look at him and know that what I feel is real and permanent and not just—" She stopped, searching for words. "Not just what?" Paige prompted gently. Not just me being scared of being alone again." Brandy's voice was quieter now. "My mother loved my father, really loved him. And he left anyway when things got hard. I won't do that to myself. I won't build my life around someone who might leave when the next crisis comes. Jake wouldn't leave. You know that. I know that's what he says now. But people change. Circumstances change. The man who stands beside you during crisis might be different from the man who stands beside you during peace." She picked up her ledger again. "I need more data." Paige laughed. "You're treating love like a research project." "Why wouldn't I? Everything else works better when you apply rigorous analysis." "That's either the saddest or smartest thing I've ever heard. I can't decide which." That afternoon, Brandy was teaching a provisioning class to a group of younger pack members when the commotion started near the eastern border. Wolves running, shouting, the particular quality of noise that meant something was wrong. She dismissed the class and headed toward the disturbance, her heart rate increasing despite her attempt to stay calm. The eastern border meant potential raiders, meant the Black Ridge Pack, meant her father. She hadn't seen Adrian since the raid 2 years ago, hadn't wanted to. Oh, the man was a calculated opportunist who'd abandoned her mother and tried to steal from her pack. As far as Brandy was concerned, he could stay gone. But when she reached the border, it wasn't raiders. It was refugees. 20 wolves, maybe more, stumbling out of the eastern woods, thin, exhausted, some injured. They moved with the desperate urgency of people who'd been running for days. And at their head was Adrian. He looked older than she remembered, grayer, more worn, yet with new scars across his face and arms. When he saw her, something complicated crossed his expression. Not quite relief, not quite regret. "Brandy," he said, I need to talk to you." Jake arrived moments later, warriors flanking him. His face went hard when he saw Adrian. "You're not welcome here." "I know, but my pack is dying, and my daughter is the only person I know who might be able to save them." Adrian's voice was stripped of its usual calculation, leaving something rawer underneath. "Please." Brandy studied the refugees, women mostly, some children, the elderly, the vulnerable ones you evacuated first when things went catastrophic. "What happened?" she asked. "Fire. Started in the southern territories, spread north. The drought made everything tinder." Adrian's jaw was tight. "We lost our stockpiles, our shelters, half our pack. These are the survivors. And you came here because you're the only person I know who prepares for disasters before they happen. Because I'm hoping you prepared enough to include wolves who don't deserve your help, but need it anyway." He looked at her directly. "I'm not asking for myself, I'm asking for them." It was, Brandy recognized, probably the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. She looked at Jake. "Your call." "My call?" His eyebrows rose. "They raided us 2 years ago." "He raided us. These are civilians who had nothing to do with that decision." She gestured to the group. "Children, Jake? Elderly?" "Nursing mothers. The same ones I prioritized during our famine." Jake's expression was complicated. Frustration, reluctance, but also the recognition that she was right. "How many can we support?" Brandy did the mental calculation. 20 refugees, integrated into existing distribution schedules, won't significantly impact our reserves. We can manage it. Short term. Short term meaning? 1 season, long enough for them to recover, reorganize, decide what happens next. She looked at Adrian. But you don't stay. Just them." Adrian nodded immediately. "Agreed. I'll leave once they're settled." "No, you won't," Brandy said. She saw his surprise, saw Jake's too. "You'll stay long enough to help rebuild your pack's infrastructure. You'll learn our preservation methods. You'll implement them in your own territory. And you'll teach your people what my mother tried to teach you 15 years ago, how to see disaster coming and prepare for it." "Brandy, those are the terms. You want help? You earn it. You learn the systems, you implement them, you make sure your pack never needs to come begging to mine again because you failed to prepare." Her voice was hard. "My mother died trying to teach you. I won't let that knowledge die with her." Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face shifted. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding what he'd lost when he'd walked away from her mother. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll learn." The next 3 months were tense but functional. The Black Ridge refugees integrated slowly into pack life. Some of Brandy's wolves resented the extra mouths to feed. Others, remembering their own near starvation, were more charitable. Adrian stayed at the edge of pack territory, learning Brandy's systems with the focused attention of someone who'd learned the cost of ignorance. She taught him the calculations, the preservation methods, the warning signs to watch for, as he absorbed it all without argument or ego. It was strange working beside him, seeing her own features reflected in his face, her mother's methods filtered through his learning. Sometimes she'd catch him looking at her with an expression that might have been pride or might have been grief for what he'd missed. She didn't ask which, didn't particularly care. On the last day before the Black Ridge survivors were scheduled to leave, Adrian asked to speak with her privately, and they stood in the preservation facility, surrounded by rows of carefully maintained supplies. The physical manifestation of everything her mother had tried to teach him. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said. "You don't get to say that." "I know, but it's true anyway." He paused. "I came here 2 years ago, planning to raid you, to take what I needed because I thought I deserved it, that I'd earned it through strength. And now? Now I understand that strength isn't about taking, and it's about preparing, about seeing what's coming and doing the hard work before crisis forces you to." He looked at the supplies around them. "This is strength, what you built, what she tried to teach me, and I was too arrogant to learn." Brandy was quiet for a moment. "She loved you. Did you know that? Even after you left, she kept a picture. Told me stories about you. She wanted me to know my father was more than the man who abandoned us. Adrian's face cracked slightly. I didn't deserve that. No, but she gave it anyway. That's who she was. Brandy met his eyes. I'm not her. I don't forgive easily. I don't forget. And I don't give second chances to people who've proven they'll fail when things get hard. I know. But, she paused, choosing her words carefully. I also learned from her that grudges are heavy, and carrying them takes energy I could use for better things. So I'm not forgiving you, but I'm also not holding on to anger. You're just someone who shares my genetics, someone I helped because helping was the right thing to do. Nothing more. Adrian nodded slowly, accepting that. That's fair. More than fair. Good. Then go rebuild your pack, implement these systems, and if you ever need help again, ask before you raid. You might be surprised by the answer. He left the next day, taking the Black Ridge survivors with him. Brandy watched them go from the eastern ridge, feeling something settle in her chest. Not closure, exactly. Just the completion of something that needed completing. You're more forgiving than you let on, Jake said, appearing beside her. I'm practical. Holding grudges against him doesn't serve anyone. Still, you could have sent him away without teaching him anything. Could have. But then his pack would fail again and they'd either die or come back here. Better to invest time now preventing that scenario. She looked at him. Besides, my mother would have wanted him to learn. This way, something good comes from everything she tried to teach him. Jake was quiet for a moment. You know what I love about you? That I have excellent resource management skills? He laughed. Among other things. But no, I love that you're ruthlessly practical about everything except the people you care about. You'll hold grudges against pack members who wronged you, but you'll teach your father who abandoned your mother because it honors her memory. You'll refuse comfort for yourself but give extra rations to children you barely know. You're a walking contradiction. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. And yes. He moved closer. It's been 2 years, Brandy. I know. I've stood beside you through rebuilding, through integration of refugees, through every crisis and calm day. I've waited, given you space, proven I'm not going anywhere. His voice was gentle but firm, so I'm asking again. Be my mate. Not because of crisis or gratitude or any other reason, except that I love you and I think you love me too. Brandy looked at him. This man who'd supported her when it cost him, who'd made her pack seer when the pack resisted, who'd stood beside her through famine and recovery and everything in between, who'd asked once, accepted her no, and waited patiently for her to catch up to what he'd known for years. She thought about her mother, who'd loved too easily and been abandoned. She thought about her own fear of needing someone, of building her life around a person who might leave. And then she thought about the last 2 years, the quiet moments and the crisis moments, and all the moments in between. The way Jake showed up, consistently, without performance or agenda. The way he listened to her, challenged her, supported her. The way he'd proven over and over that he was exactly who he said he was. Yes, she said. Jake went very still. Yes, I love you. I've loved you since you stood in that pack circle and defended me, when it would have been easier to let Dick have his way. I just needed time to believe it was real, to trust that you wouldn't leave when things got hard again. She moved closer to him. I trust that now. So yes, I'll be your mate. The smile that spread across his face was the full version, the one that reached his eyes and transformed his entire expression. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a deep and certain and full of 2 years of waiting. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Brandy said, I have conditions. Of course you do. I'm keeping my position as pack seer. I'm maintaining the stockpiles. I'm training successors. And when the next disaster comes, and it will, I'm making the resource decisions without interference. Agreed. And we're having children. At least 2. And I'm teaching them everything my mother taught me. So this knowledge doesn't die with me. Jake's expression softened. I'd like that. Good. She smiled slightly. Then let's do this properly. The mating ceremony happened 3 weeks later, at the start of winter, when the first snow was falling and the pack gathered to celebrate something other than survival for the first time in years. Brandy wore white, not because it was traditional, but because it was her mother's color. The color of her hair, the color of winter, and the color of new beginnings built on old foundations. Jake wore formal alpha regalia, but his eyes were only on her. When they sealed the bond in front of the pack, Brandy felt something shift inside her. Not loss of independence, she'd never allow that, but a recognition that strength could include partnership, that preparing for disaster could include preparing for joy. That being right didn't have to mean being alone. 5 years later, when Brandy stood in the eastern field teaching her daughter how to read the soil, the girl, they'd named her Marion, after Brandy's mother, was 4 years old with Jake's dark coloring and Brandy's white blonde hair and her father's eyes. She crouched beside Brandy, small hands pressed into the earth, nose wrinkled in concentration. "What do you smell, baby?" Brandy asked. "Dirt and—" Marion sniffed again. "Something else, like metal?" "Copper, that's right." "So what does that mean?" "That the earth is changing, that we need to watch." Marion looked up at her with serious gray eyes. "Like grandmother did." "Exactly like grandmother did." Brandy ruffled her daughter's hair. "You're learning." Jake appeared with their son, a 2-year-old boy named Raymond, after the headhunter who'd believed Brandy when others didn't. He was running ahead on unsteady legs, laughing, until Jake scooped him up. "Teaching them young," Jake observed. "Would you prefer I wait until crisis teaches them instead?" "Fair point." He set Raymond down, watched him toddle toward the drying racks with fascinated interest. "Paige says the stockpiles are at capacity. She wants to know if we should expand the cave system." "Yes, the scent patterns suggest another dry cycle in 3 to 5 years. Not as severe as the famine, but enough to require preparation." Brandy stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "Now, I'll review her expansion plans tomorrow." Marion tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, will there be another famine?" Brandy crouched down to her daughter's level, meeting those serious eyes. "Maybe. Probably not in your childhood, but possibly in your lifetime. The land cycles through abundance and scarcity. That's natural." "Will people die?" "Some might, but fewer then would die without preparation. That's our job, to prepare so when the hard times come, we're ready." She touched Marion's face gently. "Your grandmother tried to teach people that. Many didn't listen. But you will, and you'll teach your children. And eventually the knowledge won't be strange anymore. It'll just be wisdom." "Will people laugh at me like they laughed at you?" Brandy smiled. "Probably. Some people always laugh at preparation until they need it, but that's their problem, not yours. Why you do the work anyway? Because being right matters more than being liked? Because being right saves lives. Being liked is pleasant, but optional." Jake laughed. "She's definitely your daughter." "She's both of ours." Brandy stood, watching her children play among the preservation racks that had become as familiar to them as toys. "And she's going to be extraordinary." That evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Brandy updated her ledgers one final time. Yeah, but this time she added a new section. Teaching notes, Marion and Raymond, age 4 and 2 respectively. Marion shows aptitude for scent reading and pattern recognition. Raymond too young for assessment, but shows curiosity about preservation processes. Goals: full literacy in resource management by age 10. Independent crisis response capabilities by age 15, ready to serve as pack seer successors by age 20. Additional notes: ensure they understand this is not burden, but legacy. Not punishment, but gift. The knowledge that kept us alive is theirs to carry forward. She closed the ledger and looked out the window at the snow falling softly over the pack territory. Somewhere in those woods, her mother's unmarked grave had long since been reclaimed by the forest. But the knowledge her mother had carried, the warnings she'd died trying to give, the patterns she'd seen when others refused to look, all of that lived on, in Brandy, in her children, and in the stockpiles and systems and careful preparations that had become pack infrastructure rather than Omega madness. Her mother had been right, and being right had cost her everything. But Brandy had been right too, and she'd survived long enough to make being right into something larger than vindication. She'd made it into legacy.